Chapter 6: The Revolt in Kuban. I reached Rostov in the evening, and as I had to spend the night there, I went to the theater. I took a screened box in the second tier so that the audience should not see me. It was a very fashionable gathering. The ladies in full evening dress and the soldiers in brand new uniforms made the Civil War seem like a bad dream. When the interval was over, the lights went out, but the curtain did not go up. One of the actors appeared before the footlights and said to the audience, "Whilst we are here, laughing and singing, our brothers are fighting for the honor of Russia, one and indivisible, and for our safety. We owe our lives, our peace and quiet, and our welfare to these brave men and to their famous generals." Ladies and gentlemen, one of these men, the hero of Caucasia and Tsaritsyn, is in our midst tonight. Give him a cheer. A spotlight lit up my box, and the audience cheered me. We left the theater before the end of the play and went to have supper at the palace. But another ovation was awaiting me there. I took refuge in an adjoining room, which was immediately invaded by a crowd of people I knew, and some complete strangers as well, who came, glass in hand, to drink with me. Amongst other questions I was asked, "What are your relations with General Losmer? Denikin, is it true that you have broken completely with the commander-in-chief?" An invisible hand was fostering intrigues behind the scenes and sowing the seeds of doubt and confusion in all minds. As soon as I could get away, I hurried off to the railway station, hid myself in my carriage, and went to sleep without having had any supper. I arrived at Taganrog the next morning and presented myself to the commander-in-chief. He received me in the presence of his chief of staff. He was very pleasant, but it was obvious that he had something against me, and though he tried to be as cordial as usual, he was very much on his guard. I made my report and asked for orders. Romanovsky insisted on the offensive on Saratov. I urged the impossibility of this move. Finally, they authorized me to limit myself to defensive action at Tsaritsyn, and the commander-in-chief invited me to dine with him. I met several young officers from the military academy at the general staff who were old friends of mine. I could see that Denikin was losing prestige amongst them. I heard nothing but, "Can you not make him understand? And can you not explain to him?" After dinner, I had a 2 hours tete-a-tete with Denikin. In his opinion, everything was going splendidly. The possibility of a sudden change in our luck seemed to him to be out of the question. He thought the taking of Moscow was only a question of time, and that the demoralized and weakened enemy could not make a stand against us. He added smilingly, indicating the map, "Even General R is advancing with giant strides, and goodness knows what troops he has. Lord knows what he is fighting with." At this point, his aide-de-camp brought him a telegram. "It is from General Dragomirov," said Denikin when he had read it. "He says that the general staff of the Red Army, which he has been attacking, want to surrender. But General Dragomirov is demanding that this army should first attack the flank of the other Red Army, which is stationed close by." I drew his attention to the movements of the brigand Makhno and his rebels, for they were threatening our rear. "Oh, that is not serious. We will finish him off in the twinkling of an eye." As I listened to him talking, my mind filled with doubt and apprehension. The general was not such an optimist about the political situation. He railed against the English, who, he said, were playing a double game, and against our neighbors the Georgians and the Poles, adding, "I have decided to break off all negotiations with them. I have informed them that they will get nothing out of us, not so much as an inch of Russian territory." But he was even more exasperated with the separatists, as he still called the autonomous Cossacks, especially those in the Kuban. It is true that the demagogues in the Rada had been getting more and more aggressive and were in open opposition to General Denikin, but I still thought that it would be a simple matter to come to an understanding with the Kuban as a whole. The majority of the Cossacks were not in sympathy with the Rada, and a little firmness was all that was necessary to deprive the brawlers of the assembly of their leadership. Then we could treat with the Kuban on an equitable basis on the subject of their autonomy. I gave the general my opinion quite frankly, and added that, cost what it might, we must settle the question, or these misunderstandings would have disastrous consequences for us. The Rada would become more united. We had got to seize this present opportunity for solving the problem. Oh, quite, but how? We must respect the Kuban's right to autonomy and yet concentrate the executive power in the hands of the Ataman and his government, which will be responsible only to the local Rada. One of the deputies could propose this in the Rada, and I am certain that the majority would agree to it. As, however, the extreme left could make capital by stirring up trouble, I suggest that under some pretext or another, the garrison at Ekaterinodar should be reinforced with thoroughly reliable troops. The general was thoughtful for a moment, then holding out his hand to me, he said, "I give you carte blanche." The same day I went to the Kuban. Ataman Filimonov, who was very popular with the Cossacks, had suffered more than anyone else at the hands of the extreme left in the Rada. But he was too cautious and weak-willed to dare to stand up to them, so I did not tell him about my plans, but went to his colleague, General Naumenko. He viewed my scheme with especial favor because the left, under the leadership of President Makarenko, were working their hardest to make a definite breach with us. We were to prepare information concerning the negotiations of the separatists with the Greens, who were still occupying the Georgian frontier. I took the necessary measures and gave General Pokrovsky, who was in command of the place, ad hoc instructions. Then I went back to Tsaritsyn to select a brigade to go to Ekaterinodar for the opening of the Rada. I wrote to General Pokrovsky on October 21st and urged him once again not to resort to force unless it became absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, headquarters' bad strategy was beginning to bear fruit. As I had foreseen, the enemy had concentrated their troops at the junction of the Army of the Don and the Voronezh-Lysky front on October 18th. I had received a telegram from Romanovsky saying that the enemy had abandoned all hope of getting through our front line and had concentrated enormous forces on the flanks of the volunteer army, and we had got to do something about it quickly. Could you spare us some of your Cossacks, or better still, resume a general offensive in the northeast? I answered that, as I had explained to him many a time, my army could not possibly begin an offensive, that it would be of very little use to send a few regiments as he had suggested, and that my advice was to take drastic measures, leave a mixed force to defend Tsaritsyn, and send all the rest of the troops to reinforce the volunteer army. But headquarters would not agree, and kept on with their half measures, taking only 2 divisions. October 24th was the opening day of the session of the local Rada of the Kuban. I sent a telegram of welcome to the president. The next day, I was just getting ready to go to Ekaterinodar when I received a most unexpected telegram from Denikin. It read as follows. In July, the Kuban government concluded an alliance treaty with the Medjilis, a mountain tribe, which is equivalent to treason to Russia. The Kuban armies were to be put at the disposal of the Medjilis. This treaty was signed by Bitch, Savitsky, Kalabukov, and Namatokov. Order the arrest of any of these traitors you can find and have them court-martialed for treason. Taganrog, October 25, 1919. Denikin. One of the men mentioned in the telegram, Kalabukov, was a member of the Rada, as everyone knew, and was in Ekaterinodar. Denikin ought to have known that the arrest of this man could be no light matter, nor could it be done without the sanction of the Rada. A fresh collision between the commander-in-chief and the Kubanian government was inevitable, and obviously it was no good talking amicably about revising the constitution with this conflict imminent. General Denikin had promised me complete freedom of action, had given me carte blanche, to use his own expression, and here he was confronting me with an accomplished fact in the shape of this telegram. Nevertheless, I went to Ekaterinodar to decide on the spot what to do. I remained in the train and requested Generals Naumenko and Pokrovsky to come into my carriage. I learnt from them that General Denikin's telegram had been like a match to gunpowder. Ataman, government, and Rada were all furious. The local Rada, which had just been convoked, had elected Makarenko president by way of demonstration and had ordered the formation of a special regiment to guard the Rada. General Pokrovsky urged me to make a coup d'etat, dissolve the Rada, arrest the miscreants, and have them shot. I absolutely forbade him to attempt any such measure, and went over to the spas to gain time and take a few necessary measures. I detailed the situation to Denikin and begged him to tell me specifically what he wanted. On October 30th, all the commanders of the army, as well as the Ataman, received a circular telegram from the Rada and the Kuban government denying the alliance which they were supposed to have concluded with the Medjlis. The accused had not had full powers of action, and the Kuban government itself was ignorant of the fact that any such treaty had been arranged with the Medjlis. If those implicated had really exceeded their authority, they were answerable to the Rada, who alone could judge them. A representative of the Rada could submit only to its judgment. Thus, General Denikin's order was illegal and constituted an offense against the Constitution. The Kuban government demanded the revocation of the order. The same day I received a formal order from General Denikin. I was to adhere strictly to his telegram. Therefore, I ordered General Pokrovsky to have Kolobakov and the chief offenders arrested and court-martialed. The meeting of the Rada had been a stormy one. President Makarenko's speech had contained the sentence, "There is not a single general with so much as a grain of honor in his character in command of the Kuban Cossack regiments." His words roused even the assembly itself to indignation. I took the opportunity to telegraph to the Ataman Filimonov, who was urging me to address the Rada, the following message: "The insulting speech which the president of the Rada has made in the assembly concerning all the generals in the presence of members whom the commander-in-chief regards as traitors prevents me from accepting your invitation. It would accord neither with my personal dignity nor with the dignity of the army of which I have the honor to be the chief." I ordered this telegram to be published in the newspapers and told General Pokrovsky to carry out the commander-in-chief's orders, that is to say, to have the culprits arrested and tried. On November 6th, General Pokrovsky informed me that the Rada had handed Kolobakov over to him. General Pokrovsky had occupied the environs of the building in which the Rada was sitting, cheered on by the Cossacks, and had proceeded to disarm the guard and arrest the chief offenders. The Rada had sent a deputation to the commander-in-chief to offer him a polite apology, and Makarenko had fled. That evening, I left for Ekaterinodar. I was welcomed at the station by the Ataman, his colleague, the members of the general staff, General Pokrovsky, and numerous deputations. The Cossacks of the Guard formed a platoon of honor. I anticipated that this solemn reception would have a salutary effect on the members of the Rada. Kolobakov had already been condemned by the court-martial, and General Pokrovsky had ratified the death sentence, which had been carried out at dawn. The other prisoners had not yet come up for judgment. The Rada had interceded for them, sending a delegation to the commander-in-chief. After an interview with General Pokrovsky, I went to the Rada, which was already in session. In the speech which I intended to make, I had decided to avoid the political side of the question as much as I could, because I did not entirely share the opinion of headquarters on the Kubanian question. As I entered the chamber, the Ataman welcomed me and ended his speech by begging me to release all the deputies who had been arrested so that they might be judged by the Rada itself. From the tribunal, I made a long speech, dwelling on the great exploits of the Kuban Cossacks, the hardships they were enduring because certain demagogues were cutting off supplies for political reasons, and the terrible condition the country would be in if the Reds should return. In conclusion, I said, "Gentlemen, politics are none of my business. I am only a soldier, but I know where the trouble lies. The party spirit of a few wretched individuals prevents the Ataman, the Rada, and each one of you from doing all that you want to do for your brothers and sons. In spite of all your goodwill, your hands are tied, and you can do nothing. Brothers in arms, from the day when your Ataman and his government are masters, instead of these brawlers, your children will want for nothing. I am leaving for the front. Can I say to my splendid men that their fathers and brothers, the members of the local Rada, are coming to their rescue like one man?" The assembly answered me with cries of, "Yes, tell them that," and with cheers. I went back to my train. A delegation from the Rada came to me there to intercede afresh for the prisoners. Once again, I made flattering remarks about the Kuban Cossacks. then mentioned casually that if we could be sure that the Ataman and the Rada could really be of some help to the troops, we would be only too happy to forget the past. The Ataman and the government have given proof enough of their goodwill, but can they do anything? They began to discuss the question I had propounded there, and changes in certain clauses of the Constitution were worked out so that they could be proposed in the Rada the next day. Finally, we achieved our object. The Constitution was revised, and power passed to the Ataman. I telegraphed to General Denikin that I had promised to spare the lives of those members of the Rada who were under arrest. Ataman Filimonov, who had proved to be very weak, resigned. General Ouspensky was elected in his stead. My mission being finished, I went back to Taganrog. The situation had grown much worse since my last visit to headquarters. The enemy's cavalry had penetrated our front line at the junction of the Army of the Don and the Volunteer Army, and was now threatening the rear of the latter. Orel and Kursk had been abandoned, and the front was rapidly drawing in on Kharkov. Further back, the province of Ekaterinoslav was a prey to risings. The people's discontent grew with our reverses. General Yudinich's offensive on Petrograd had petered out, and the fragments of his army were falling back towards Estonia. In Siberia, Kolchak's beaten army was in rapid retreat. The storm was brewing. I made my report to the commander-in-chief and asked his permission to reopen the strategical question. Once again, I insisted on the necessity of sending not 2 regiments, but all I could spare to reinforce the volunteer army. At last, the general told me to wait for him at Rostov, as he would be there shortly, and would then discuss the question with me again. My stay in Rostov was a very painful business. People there were acutely dissatisfied with Denikin and very uneasy about the state of Maevsky's volunteer army, which was completely discredited. As is usual in such cases, as one man was more and more discredited, another became dearer and dearer to the people. Unfortunately, this other was myself. When I went into a house, people crowded round the door. In the restaurants, they prevented me from eating, morning or evening. I was greeted with the same ovations and always heard the same questions. Have you been appointed as Maevsky's successor yet? When are you going to take the situation in hand? You are the only man we can rely on. Therefore, there was a great deal of gossip going about, and the mischief makers certainly profited from it to make things difficult for me with Denikin. On November 11th, I received a letter from the commander-in-chief. He wrote that, after ripe reflection, he had decided that he could not agree with my strategical proposals. On the same day, General Chatilov let me know that the enemy were resuming the initiative on the left bank of the Volga, and Denikin sent me back to Ekaterinodar, where I had to see the new ataman. From there I went to my headquarters, but I had scarcely arrived before a telegram recalled me to Taganrog. On the other fronts, things had gone from bad to worse. The armies were in rapid retreat all along the line. Already there was fighting near Kharkov. The concentration of cavalry which I had proposed a few days earlier was no longer possible. The disaster that I had foreseen for so long seemed to be upon us at last.